Welcome to the P.E.A.R Project podcast. Today we are going to be talking to Judy Window. She's a very active member in Manchester, New Hampshire community, and she is definitely known for her community outreach work. Anybody in Manchester, New Hampshire knows Judy. She also works with Diz's Cafe that her and her husband started back in 2020. What a year to start something, but they took it on and doing amazing. And she's also the founder of the New Hampshire Granite State Ambassadors, which is a promoting tourism organization. And it's definitely what I would call a broad area of things that Judy has done over time. So I've asked her to come here today to share some of her experience and wisdom on where she has pivoted, where she's explored new things, where she's adapted, or where she's repositioned herself to keep going in life. So Judy and I met working on a project quite a few years ago and have stayed in touch, fortunately. So welcome, Judy.
Thanks, Jillian. It's good to be here. Thank you.
So, I know that you and Diz own a restaurant right now.
Yes,
So,
we
can
do.
we take you back a few years to what did you decide that you wanted to do when you were younger?
When I was younger, I wanted to be a businesswoman. Even I remember my parents had this desk, this big, the old-fashioned desk with all the little drawers in it and stuff. And they had it outside, like so we could play with it. And I had a stapler and I had things in my drawers, and so I always wanted to be a businesswoman. So I had no specific business that I wanted to do, which kind of I laugh because when I think back to that, it actually came true.
I
Uh,
think it's amazing. Sometimes we don't realize when kids are playing, and if we can observe what they're doing, they are kind of preempting what some of their natural skills are.
I agree with that. And that's why when I talk to kids or I talk to young people, I said, well, what is it that you like to do? Which, people say, oh, well, that's just so fluffy. Well, no, it's not, because if you have a natural tendency to do something and you like something, you're going to be much better at it. And if
Yep.
you're playing with it in your mind,
Yep.
that's all we're doing every day, right? We're just playing. We're not re This isn't real, you know? This isn't real life. We're just playing. We're playing mother, we're playing businesswoman, we're playing restaurant owner, Hey, and once you do it, you keep doing it long enough and it becomes real.
So, what was your first paying job that you had?
The very first time I got paid to work was at an expo when I was 9 years old. My neighbor needed some help in a booth and said that they would pay me to, I was the girl and I loved it. I thought this was the coolest thing. It was like a little stick that you rubbed on your glasses or on your mirror so it wouldn't fog up, and I had to demonstrate it. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever, that you could actually make money and just entertain people. So
So
it
that was your
wasn't really
first.
a job, but that was my first paying job.
Well, it sounded like your entrepreneurial spirit sticked in because
Yeah,
it uh,
yeah.
it helped you to do that. So, what did you move on to do then in your adult life?
In my adult life, well, the very first job after I was 16, I worked at a movie theater, which taught me how to face money, because back in those days, you really had to pay attention. There wasn't machines and stuff that did all that. So I learned how to count money, how to face money, how to communicate with guests and all of that stuff. So I really liked that. That was fun. And then after that, my first like big girl job after high school was working at a bank. And I worked at I worked at a couple of banks, but just one in particular for about 12 years. And that taught me a lot. And I used my money skills as a teller. I did teller work for about 5 years. Then I worked in the back room, doing all sorts of like check kiting and all the old-fashioned things that people don't even know what they are anymore. And then I worked in the money center, and then I worked myself up to special assets. And that was when the banks all started to fail. And I had this boss who was so mean and awful to me, or to everybody. He put it this way, if his hair was combed when he came in, he was okay to talk to. If his hair was messy, you stayed far away from him. And everybody knew. But he gave me a book called D-Base, and he said, just go read it. Yeah, go read it. I'm like, okay, so I'm just reading it, like something like a boss would tell you to do. Um, and so I did that. And then I was like, this is really interesting. How come we don't do this? Because this was in the day where the computer was all in the back room.
Yep.
And you had to put on your little hat and your booties to go into the computer room. Nobody had computers on their desks or anything. And I found a way to download all of that information into my desktop computer, which not everybody had. I had one because I think he just saw that in me or something. Anyway, so I did that. And then by the time I ended, the banks were taken over by the Bank of Ireland as a transition. Um, Ireland, my boss from the Bank of Ireland was a big, burly Irish woman who looked just like my grandma. So we
Oh,
got along really well. And she really encouraged me to continue this whole computer idea. And by the time I ended, I had a computer on every loan officer's desk, which
mm.
no other bank anywhere had. No other place had computers on people's desks. And we were using Macs back then, and nobody knew anything about Macs. So of course, they transitioned back to PCs. But that's one thing that I thought was really cool about working in a place that seemed to be very focused in one thing, that I really took it in a different turn.
Well, it sounds like, as you've gone through, you've taken ideas that people have given you and kind of latched onto it and went, that's a good idea. Let's build this out, which I think when I met you, we were doing the same thing when we were building the financial literacy program. And you were taking the skills that you had learned from your banking and incorporating those into the program that we were writing. And so that was another kind of transition. So you went from being in the movie theater to being in the bank. And so, how did you start the Granite State Ambassadors?
Well, that was actually directly related to the banks all closing and getting laid off. And there was, I was an officer of the bank by the time I got laid off. There were no jobs. And as an officer of a bank, you can't just go and work at McDonald's. They say, yeah, you're overqualified. So I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Um, I started volunteering my time at an organization called Federated Arts, and eventually I became a part-time person there. And that was like a kind of a, if you can imagine, a chamber of commerce for the arts, where we would gather all the money, um, go out and get big lumps of money, and then disperse it to the smaller organizations, so they wouldn't have to all go out, and the businesses wouldn't have everybody knocking on their door. They would just have one group. So that was an interesting job. And uh, there I met the person that we both worked for, Peter Morgan, because he was all involved in the arts. And I went to a meeting, just a meeting, about Convention and Visitors Bureau, because it was the arts, and Convention and Visitors Bureaus were, kind of promoted that because they wanted people to come and not only stay at hotels and book conferences, but also do things in the area. So I went. By the time I left that meeting, he he, Peter, but other people don't. So Peter is Peter. So he had me on the potential board list. So I was like, I just went to this one meeting. I don't even know. So he had me on the potential board list. And then from there, I think it was a couple weeks later, I was the secretary of the board. And like a couple of months later, I was the executive director, which makes me laugh because I didn't even know what a convention and visitor bureau was. So again, that is the whole say yes, just say yes, do it. Who who cares? Just pretend we're all acting. I was in the theater a lot when I was a kid. My whole family was in the theater from when I was 11 till I was 21. So I always approach everything. I was like, okay, I can act like this, So I did that. And Peter, again, I'm 60, I'm going to be 68 now. And I knew Peter probably in the early 90s. So, like, however old, like in my 30s. So, I've known him my whole entire life. He's been a very big influence on what I do, what I know, and how to approach things. He's very much more straightforward. I think we complement each other. I think that's why he was always drawn to my personality because I'm a little crazy and he was a very straightforward. So, like, he would bounce ideas off me and I'd take them and run. So that was basically how I started Granite State Ambassadors was at the Convention and Visitors Bureau. I had an idea. I was always looking for free office space. And the airport in Manchester it turned into this, nice airport. And I said, you know, the state was complaining how nobody knew where to go and the volunteers there, they had like RSVP volunteers for the primary and they didn't know what to tell people. And they had forgot that people hadn't been to an airport in Manchester, New Hampshire. If there was this little teeny like runway, but now this was actually a really big, nice airport. And I said, I could do that. I could do that with volunteers. And they said, that's what you're gonna do. And I ended up starting Granite State Ambassadors. Peter was the chair of the Convention and Visitors Bureau at the time, and we recruited. He knew and recruited Bill Peterson from the New Hampshire College at the time, and the three of us founded Granite State Ambassadors, and it's still going strong. The girl that's running Granite State Ambassadors now, Kelly Breyer, worked for me for 11 years, and she's been running Granite State Ambassadors longer than I did. So
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
successful and I love it. I'm still both Peter and I are all three of us are still on the board. Um, but I don't have anything to do with the hands-on everyday stuff anymore. And Kelly's just taken it way further than I could have ever imagined. I got it to a certain point. I'm a developer. I like developing things, but once it becomes, day to day, I'm less
Maintenance type
I'm
things. Yeah.
less interested in that. Like I said, I like being a businesswoman. So I took it to a certain point, and then I said to them, you know what? I, we went through 9/11. We went through all sorts of big things while we were doing it. And we were based at the airport, but not strictly at the airport. We were statewide. We were at welcome centers and all chambers and all sorts of things. So once that happened and I got to the point where I was like kind of tired of it, I said, I think I'll move on. I'll pass it on to the next generation. And that's always been something that I've really liked to do. My hope in life was to be a sage and to really just give people, impart my wisdom to people, which,
So
it
then
happens.
that kind of brings us up almost to you and your husband starting a restaurant, brand new, off, you're not doing buying it from somebody. It's not a hand-me-down. We are starting this from scratch. What made you guys do that?
Peter again. It was that damn Peter Morgan.
I'm
So
gonna have to play this for him so he can hear it.
yes, I know. He'll laugh at that. Um, so after I left Granite State Ambassadors, I went back to banking for a little while, thinking, well, I might as well get a pension and kind of have my retirement. Working for a nonprofit is tough work, low pay, no benefits. So I mean, it's a work of passion. So I thought, well, I'm getting older. I'm going to retire in 7 or 8 years. So I think maybe I should do that. I tried, I couldn't do it. It was so long since I had worked for somebody. I've always been my own boss and for most of my adult life. So it was really hard going back. So Peter always kept up with me and always, called me when he was back in New Hampshire or kept in touch with me. So he had called me, come in, come visit me. And So I went and talked to him and he's like, "So how's it going?" I'm like, No, I don't really like it." And he goes, "So how do you want to come work for me?" And I said, "What would I be doing?" And he said, "Well, I have a foundation now that is focused on financial literacy." And I said, I'd love to be able to do that. That would be really fun with my experience in banking, with my practical application of I am not a good student. So helping people learn about finances that I didn't learn when I was younger and didn't learn from school, and to be able to apply that in a way that people would understand, that was really intriguing to me. And then I worked with him, with you, and then moved on and started building his other companies. He had real estate companies, and he owned mobile home parks. And so I built his company down in the Carolinas at the same time that we were doing the Morgan Franklin Fellowship. So that was fun and good. And then, and part of my job was to help Peter do other things too. He paid me, just a salary to do other things. One of my jobs was to drive his car down in Florida and drive it back. So
Remember that.
on one of the trucks, because I love driving. We were just talking about this before we started recording about how driving is a little harder than it used to be. But anyways, I used to drive his car down. My husband met me down in Florida. Um, Peter, in the 40 something years that we've known each other, never met my husband. He
Ooh.
thought I was lying, that I didn't really have a husband. My husband's very quiet and not definitely not personality like me. So he just is not he doesn't meet people, and he's always been in the restaurant industry, so he always worked opposite hours than normal business people. Anyway, so he had met me down there, met Peter, and Peter's Peter, and he asks all the questions like, what are your passions? What do you really want to do? And my husband was actually in transition at the time, and he said, I really would like to run a restaurant. And he goes, "Well, why don't you open up a restaurant?" And my husband's like, "Okay." But I mean, we didn't have any money. We weren't those kind of people that you could have, $250,000 and just plop it down to open up a restaurant.
Yep.
So on our way home, we were talking about it and had stopped in at a Jimmy John's. And my husband was like, maybe we could do something like this, a franchise. It's not as scary. You get a lot of bumpers, that you can
Yep. You
kind of
get a lot
build
of
along the
support from
way.
your, yeah.
Exactly, the
Yep.
franchisee. So we started down that road, and with the three of us, with my husband's extensive restaurant experience, with my business experience, and with Peter's financial experience, Jimmy John's was like, "Woohoo! These people are awesome." Went through the whole process, flew out there, came back, they flew out, they met everything. We had a location, and radio silence. And we were like, what the heck happened? And I guess they were going through some transitions internally, but they didn't really tell us what was going on. I guess they couldn't, but
Yeah.
so we said after a few months or a few weeks even, we were reaching out, nothing, nothing, nothing. We said, let's just do it ourselves. So we just pivoted, and we started thinking in a little bit different way. We had a family website that we had a cooking show on. It was just a stupid family website, a stupid little cooking show called This Is Cafe. And you can still look it up on YouTube, and it's still there. And it was about 12 or 13 years ago. And that's why we called it This Is Cafe. It's not a cafe, it's a full restaurant, but we called it This Is Cafe as a wink and a nod to that series that we
I
did.
did not know that part of the story. That's
Really?
new to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you notice, our logo doesn't say Diz's Cafe. It just says Diz's. On
Yeah.
the building, it says Diz's Downtown, but we're doing business as Diz's Cafe, just as that little. We have everything in our restaurant is a little wink and a nod to something else. I could tell you a story about every reason why we did something there.
Yeah.
But that's how we got into the. My
But
husband
you
has always
actually
done.
opened and then sort of closed because
We didn't even open. So we signed our lease on January 6th, 2020. Now, people had heard like something in China, people were getting sick. Nobody thought it was going to come. It was the furthest thing from our mind. And we had spent the last 6 months looking for locations and blah, blah, blah. We, we had our eye on the location that we're at for several months. Um, but there was already a restaurant in there. And so, it ended up being very interesting that that restaurant went out of business. Approached the people that owned the building, who I knew from the bank, because she was on the board at the bank, the person that owned it. So I knew her. So I reached out to her. And so we renovated the whole thing, took it down right to the basics, the no walls, the floors, everything. Renovated the whole thing on the idea of what we wanted to do and what we had found out from downtown, what was needed and everything. Downtown was booming at the time. And so we were supposed to open in April. We were almost ready. We were about 2 weeks from opening, and COVID hit and everything closed. And nobody knew. And I know that, like, in retrospect, you think you knew. I remember saying to my husband and to one of the guys that was working with him to help open up the restaurant, a friend of his, that was working as was going to be our general manager. And they were like, I was like, this is serious, guys. It's coming. I I can see it. It's coming. This is going to be bad. This is not just a regular. They're like, oh no, no, it won't be bad. We'll just close for a week and then we'll reopen. Well, we didn't get open till May 29th. And we finally opened. We could only serve food through the windows. We weren't
Wow.
even allowed to sit outside.
Nope.
And then a few weeks later, they allowed outdoor seating. Several weeks after that, you could come in, but it was very like sparse. You had to have six. We're lucky. We have a very big dining room. So you could have 6 feet between people. You could only have a total of 6 people at a table, and they all had to be either related or living in the same house, and all those crazy rules. And what I think people don't understand is that COVID did not lift until May of 2023.
Hmm.
We had COVID restrictions for the first 3 years we were open. After that, people were still very COVID. They didn't seek out new places. They didn't walk around downtown. They would go out, they would do what they do, and people were starting to do things, but it wasn't normal. And I would say March of this year was the first month that I would say that that's what we thought was going to be in the March that we were going to open.
Mm. Wow.
So it was 5 years.
5 years. Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Yep.
So, what would you attest to the success of that? I mean, I know you have tenacity because you definitely stuck with it, and you had
Tenacity.
a vision for it. But I mean, outside of that, what made you guys be successful? Because you're not only there 5 years later, you're doing very well in the downtown area of Manchester, New Hampshire.
No. Um, mm. I don't even I don't even know. Honestly, we're not quitters at all. In the midst of all of that, like it's been about 18 months now, almost 2 years ago, my husband fell and broke his shoulder in 4 places. So,
I
and I mean,
remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
we one thing after another. The day that we opened up for breakfast, something happened and they had to close off the streets. Every single little time, everything happened. So we were just like, you know, this is w quality of life. This is what we're doing. We're doing this because we want to be in charge of ourselves. We could be in a business where people were telling us what to do, but nope, every day we could do this.
And
Um,
and I, and
it,
when I was trying to decide of who I thought would be a good fit for this podcast, P is definitely something you do. You pivot like you wouldn't believe. So it was
I mean,
great.
it drives my employees crazy. It does. It drove the friend of Diz's so crazy that he ended up leaving because he was he had to think about things for 3 years before like if he wanted to back in those days when people there weren't enough workers out there. I would say, because I hire people on the spot. They walk in, I see them, I get a sense, I talk to them for a few minutes, I get a sense, I hire them. What's the worst thing that can happen? I can fire them. But he wasn't like that. He wanted to think about it and research and do. I said, those people are gone. They're gone 3 jobs from now. They're not thinking about you anymore. But it was very hard for him. He couldn't work at my pace. Um, our general manager now is our niece, and she is really good at taking direction, but taking the lead too. I don't
Mhm.
know how to explain it because even today we had a little thing where she was getting somebody in and doing something, and I'm like, I called her and I said, "Do you remember we talked about like doing it a different way?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot." And I said, "I'm really sorry. I don't mean to like, be stepping on your head, but I think that it would work out better this way." And she's like, "Yeah, you're right." And so she's good at pivoting too. So between the two of us, we make a really good pair of minds because she takes a different approach. I take a different approach, and I love listening to that. Same thing with my we have three. So it's my husband. We've always decided we wanted to do a three management system: front of the house, back of the house, and outreach into the community. So my husband's back of the house, Amanda's front of the house, and I'm outreach into the community. Amanda also does outreach into the community too. And now we have a second tier, like we call them the emerging leaders. And it's my 2 grandchildren and my granddaughter-in-law-ish, which I keep calling her, because she's with my grandson. Now she's been working with us since we opened, which is kind of fun to know. And she's awesome. I imagine that as things progress, she'll be the general manager. My niece will turn into the operations director, which is kind of a little bit what I do. And so things will just change, and we'll just pivot people's personalities to what they do best. And this is what we were talking about before is like everybody, when you're playing, when you're little, you have a certain personality, and it'll emerge eventually. And so that's what I'm trying to teach this emerging leaders. They step right up, they're right there, they're learning everything that we know. We give them all the responsibilities, but we're kind of there to catch them if they fall, which they
Got to
rarely
put that,
do.
got to put that safety net there just in
Right.
case. Yep.
Right. But I mean, they take things, and now that I'm older, we have what we call the three or four generations. We have uh, my age. My husband is about 6 years younger than me. My niece is about 25 years younger than me, and then we have a 23, 24, and 28-year-old. So all of those generations together in a restaurant is very helpful.
Yeah. And I know we've talked in the past about, having multi-generations working together because, when you're eager and willing to learn from one another, there's value in it.
Oh,
Because the
awesome.
younger generation sees things a lot differently, I think. But then to be able to maybe add some of, like you were saying, the sage wisdom
Yep.
into, we've
Yeah.
experienced this, if you'd at least consider looking at it a different way.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And a lot
No.
of people are a lot of restaurants particularly are having trouble keeping employees. We keep our employees for a very long time. And most of them leave just to see what's greener on the other side, and some of them come back. But with that said, people say, "Oh, kids these days." Rah." And there's two things like that. Number one, give me 15 minutes with you and I'll tell you why you don't have staff. It's really easy. And number two, who says that we're doing it right and they're doing it wrong? Like, I don't know about you, but I'm still working, and I'm still working hard because that's how I grew up and that's my nature. But is that right? Is that healthy? I don't know. Maybe the way the kids are looking at it now, where they have that what people call the work-life balance. I don't even think the younger kids call that. It's just normal for them. They don't
Yeah.
they miss that memo because they had that 5 years of COVID in their formative years, and they were all stuck in the house and they weren't allowed to go out. So they were like,
Right.
this is normal for us. Oh, you mean I have to go out to work? That's weird.
Well, it sounds like that you've had a very interesting career. It's not all been in the same area, but
No.
I think that it sounds like you've been able to take ideas and not only envision what they could do, but then actually make them work. So I think there's a lot of valuable information in there, hopefully. Um, to know that, just because you're laid off, you don't give up. Just
Right,
because a pandemic hits, you don't give up.
right.
You find what works for you. And I think too, I was wanting to talk a little bit about networking because you've talked about people in your life and how, you get in the right with the right people in the right place at the right time. How has that impacted what you've done?
Oh, and I was just thinking of that, and I was going to mention it because I think this was very impactful in my life, and I would recommend it to anybody, is don't just work, do other things. I was for 20 years, I was selective service. I was the chairman of the selective service for the state of New Hampshire. And so when you think about how cool that is, I, if there was a draft and if they got to the review board, which was the highest level, and we said something and they didn't like it and they wanted to appeal, then they appeal from me to the President of the United States.
Oh,
So
wow.
when you think about that, that's like, pew, that's a cool thing. I was the chairman of the Holy Cross Family Learning Center, which worked with refugees and immigrants, teaching them English. And so all these little teeny things really helped uh, kind of just put together this little puzzle of life. Um, and you might have like the little duck over in the corner, it doesn't make the whole picture, but it was part of the picture. And it really does really make a difference in your life of the weird little knowledge things that you have in your, because people say to me, how do you know all of that stuff? I don't know. I always said yes anytime somebody asked me to do something, even if it was crazy and out of my normal path.
Yeah, and I think that's an important piece too, is that you're willing to say yes
Mm,
and that you're willing to give it a try. And I think sometimes today people don't do things because they're afraid. They're afraid of either they don't have what it takes, or they're afraid of not knowing what the next steps are. And I
yeah.
think sometimes that's where the fun is, and not knowing what's around the corner, but being willing to give it a little effort to see where it could go.
We had talked about, and I think this was off camera, we had talked about the things that people say to you that stick with you. And it's just some little thing, that somebody somewhere said to you that you remember. I know a lot of people will say to me, because I also taught social media when it first came out, so that was an interesting little word thing in my life. And I have people that still come to me and say, oh, I remember when you said this, that always stuck with me. But one thing that always stuck with me that my dad taught me was, if you do one thing and you fail 100% of the time. If you do 100 things and you fail 50% of the time, you still succeeded 50% of the time.
Wow, that's good. Good information to have. Yeah. And I think too that, and there again, I'm hoping that this podcast gets shared across generations, because that's something that you and I work with is, we not only work with people that are in our generation, but to be able to then, it's not really passing it forward, it's kind of passing it back
Right.
to those coming up behind us and stepping in. So I appreciate your candor and your conversation here, and
Thank
we
you,
may
Jillian.
bring you back on again at some point in time. But we will share information in our show notes on Diz's Cafe. So if you're any chance being anywhere around Manchester, New Hampshire, to
Stop in.
stop in and check with them. Definitely a fun place. I'm hoping to be back and seeing you in person again soon.
Can't
And
wait.
yeah, it will be lovely. So thank you, Judy. I appreciate you
Thank you,
being part of this.
Jillian. Bye.
Bye bye.